All right, so I got halfway through this job and thought, man, I really should have making a video for this. 2001 F150 4.6 V8 had a water leak somewhere in this valley or behind it. Water was dripping pretty steadily out from behind or out from underneath the starter whenever the truck was warm. And so, not my truck, doing it for a friend, and traced the water leak best I could back to this let's see here, this tube that runs in the valley, and of course you can't get to it without taking the intake off. Good job, Ford. And come find out the hose that connects right here was dry rotted, and I think my O-rings, which are hard to see from this video because I'm the only one recording, I don't have any help, but down in here, this little nipple that comes off, there's O-rings on it. I think it was leaking just a little bit around those two and pulling up in the valley and then pouring down the back of the motor. So I've tested this. I mean, it's pretty solid. You can look at it and see it looks pretty clean. Not bad for a 250,000 mile truck. The nipple's intact too. I know they're notorious for disintegrating over time, but it's pretty solid and it looks in decent shape. So I tested the pipe, make sure it wasn't leaking. Honestly, just by running some water through it. And now I'm in the process of putting everything back together. I've already cleaned off my around my ports up here. Of course, I'll brush them off with some brake clean one more time. I went ahead and replaced this knock sensor down here too. Let me climb up here. The wiring, I don't know if you can see that in the video or not, but the wiring back here where there's a couple wires exposed, the insulation was rubbed off, so I'm sure that wasn't functioning like it's supposed to. It's probably shorting out. So put a new one back on here. I think I did that a few days ago. I don't remember. 8 foot-pounds, that sound right? Torqued it down. That needs to be torqued. And now I'm about to start replace these O-rings. That was the last piece I was waiting on. All the other gaskets and everything came in way before that, naturally. And so now I'm going to work on putting this thing back together. Hopefully we have no more water leak. So I've got a pick to get these things off. There we go. There's one. It really doesn't look that bad. There's two. All right, let me put a little brake cleaner on there. Let's clean that thing off. There we go. I also don't know if you can see it or not. Back here in the back of the valley, there's a plug where I guess it goes down into the bell housing. I'm guessing it drops down into an area that probably drains to where the torque converter is. That plastic thing that was in there, that was plugging that, was disintegrated and in pieces, and you don't want trash getting down in there. So I found some of these little rubber like body panel plugs for underneath the cars, and took some silicone and stuck that thing on there. It's not perfect, but there's not going to be a lot to mess with it to make it come loose, so it should be just fine. All right, now we got the new O-rings. I'm always afraid I'm going to break these things. Or lose them. They're very tiny. Basically, I'm just sliding them on the bottom, rolling them over, making sure they're not twisted. All right. We'll spray a little bit WD-40 on this thing, so that pipe slides on and doesn't push those washers off. Okay. Now this is the fun part, because then you get to remember how everything goes back. And of course this thing bolts back here through these holes. I think it's these, I believe it's these two. Nope, it's these two. Bolts to these big ones back here on the back of the block. 13 mil bolts, and then one of them got a ground that goes on it, 10 mil bolt. And I can't remember how this thing threads, but I think it's something like that. Yeah, something like that. Go ahead and slide this on. Boy, Ford could have done something way different than that. Alright, so I think we're good there. Of course, that harness will plug into that. I don't know where that goes. That might go on the back of the intake. We'll get this thing bolted in first. And I've got new heater hoses too. Anytime you do something like this, you want to replace as much as you can, because it is a headache to get into this stuff. All right, where's my bolts? So, bolt, I don't know if you can see that, I can't see the camera. Bolt, and the one of them, that on top, 10 millimeter bolt. The other one doesn't have anything that goes on it. You want to be very careful with these, because what happens is you drop it down back behind the block, and you think it's tight right here. All right. Of course, I'm going to leave some play in it so I can get the other one in there as well. If you haven't been doing your daily sit-ups, you'll feel it doing this job. Woo, almost lost it. 13 millimeter. There we go. Oh, feel bad for the next guy that's got to take that thing off, which will probably be me. All right, now let's put this ground back on. I love how something that has to do with electricity is grounded to a water hose. I shouldn't say anything. I do not have an engineering degree. I have no idea what goes on to this stuff and to designing the stuff. I know it sure is impressive though. Like, even with stuff like this hose that will kind of peeve you off. Pretty impressive what some of these engineering guys do. So obviously I like brake clean. I just used it, but people are always talking about brake clean, and it's definitely a good thing to have, but it goes quickly and it gets expensive. Another thing I'd recommend, get you a container of mineral spirits and some of these little Scotch-Brite pads. They're perfect for cleaning up metal pieces and bolts and nuts and stuff like that. Like if we look at this, shine that thing up pretty well. Even got a little bit of a scuff on the surface too, so it'll ground very well. So don't forget the mineral spirits. A little less cost effective. Granted, there are some things you don't want to use it on, but we'll slide this thing back in here. Forgive me, I don't remember which one I took it off. The point of it is for it to be ground to the motor, and both of these bolts go into the engine head, so I don't think it matters which one it goes on. So I'm going to put it onto the one that's more easily accessible. And whatever you do, I'm mainly talking to myself right now, not you. Don't drop this thing back here behind the motor. Oh, I would guess by the length of this ground, it doesn't go on this one down here. All right, I need my 10 mil wrench. Love a good ratchet wrench too. Ta-da. All right, so our ground's back on. From the looks of things, this harness pops back into there. Yeah, there we go. I think we're about ready for the intake. All right, so one thing we want to go ahead and do is put on this heater hose. It should stay out of our way. but you can see where the end of that nipple comes out. And I have changed these heater hoses before without the intake on. It's a pain in the butt, so we're going to do it right now, hopefully. And if I remember correctly, this one goes on the outside of the heater cord, the one that's on the far passenger side. And you could reuse the old, let me get up here a little bit, the old clamps, or you can use one of these. Honestly, this was already on here. I think I changed the heater hoses on this like 5 years ago, actually. Not too tight, but also not too loose. Don't want it leaking again. It's snug. And then this just clips on. I'm not going to clip it on yet, so I can flex it around and make sure it stays out of my way. That's that. That's ready to go. Double check. 8 mil, at least for this one. All right, and now I believe we're ready for the intake. We got the fuel lines over here tucked out of the way. There's an injector harness. Make sure my harness is over here out of the way. Same thing over here. So what I'm going to do, I'll cut the video for this, but basically I'm just going to wipe this off real quick, pull these, get the air compressor, blow this out, wipe these off, these ports off, port runners, whatever they are, off, and we'll get the intake on. All right, so we got the rags, pull out all the ports. The last thing we did was put on that heater hose. You can see I've come through and shined these up. You want to clean these really well. Sometimes I guess this grime gets stuck on here. I've tried scrubbing it, I can't get all that off, but I got a lot of it off around those water ports. So you want to come in here, make sure this is a nice, smooth, clean surface, or the gasket seals like it's supposed to. Take you an air hose, something, and spray these intake ports out really well. And what's always interesting about this is, I don't know if you can see it, the sun's hitting this one pretty well, but you can see all the little burrs that are just naturally in that metal right there. And so you could actually get a lot more, and granted this is a lot of work and not really worth the gains you get from it, but you could get a lot more horsepower and torque if you took these to a machine shop and had them do what they call polishing them, basically smooth them out so it doesn't create as much turbulence when the air goes down in them. That's the polishing part of port and polish, and porting would be just like grinding them out and making them bigger. But there's even like rough edges right here around the top that could be smoothed out. In the intake, it's even much worse. So we want to get this nice and clean. Like I said, this truck has 250,000 miles on it, so we're not after horsepower, we're just trying to keep it going. So take our intake, or get our new gaskets here. I believe they're interchangeable. I think they match regardless of how you just gotta line the ports up. So we'll slide them down there. Make sure these little tabs right here go down in these holes. Probably a good idea to make sure those holes are cleaned out before you do this. But we're gonna get in here, line these up, push them down in there well. All right. And that'll hold them in place pretty securely while we set the intake down. And also, I'm gonna put these things down, and we're gonna go ahead and put the intake down on top of it. That way, if I have to leave, or you have to leave for whatever reason, you don't have to come back in and plug these ports again and clean them out and all that fun stuff. So like, you kind of want to do this in one fell swoop if you can. All right. I don't know what you call these little grommets or washers, these little metal pieces in this gasket. Check the gasket that you took off. It's because I know with some of these that you can actually punch those things out. I had to for the upper and lower intake gasket to make sure it fits like it's supposed to. Okay, look at that, getting somewhere now. Maybe that gasket looks too good to cover up. All right, we'll get the intake now. All right, here we go. I got the intake propped up right here, and I gotta figure out how I'm gonna hold this and climb up here, but thank goodness this thing's aluminum and it's not cast iron like old cars, because it's probably about 3 times the weight and it's heavy enough. So upper and lower intake is together in one piece. Make sure it's in one piece before you put it in here. I didn't video this, I wish I would have, but I actually took the lower piece and upper piece off of this thing. Sorry for the poor video, I'm editing my own camera. And replace the gasket between the two because I've already done all this other work, so why not? Old truck has probably got some kind of a vacuum leak or something going on, so I went ahead and changed it, torqued them down. I can't remember the torque set, I think 89 inch-pounds, something like that for the upper and lower. Torqued it down and cleaned up like the bolt hole areas, cleaned up the, I'm not gonna flip this thing over, but let me see, like, where's my hand? Yeah, so I cleaned up the ports down here under here. So they're nice and shiny and dry, just like you saw on the engine heads. And we're gonna set this thing down in here very carefully and very awkwardly. So let me reposition so I'm not sitting on my leg. Hope you've been doing your push-ups, because you're gonna need them. The good news is that gasket is pretty stout. Oh, here comes my foot. Oh, there we go. We're just gonna tilt this thing down in here very gently, like, and hopefully I don't go with it, and slide it down in. Yeah. Good news is that if I mess this up, it's all on camera, and you can make fun of me for however long this is on YouTube. Okay, tilt. Oh, there's the mabs. There we go. We're getting somewhere now. Okay, we're mostly lined up. Now what I'm going to do is get my bolts. I wish it had a tab like it does for the heads. And by the way, I don't know if the camera caught this, I just had my foot resting here. I was not pushing on that. That was all ab work. And I don't have abs, so I'm worn out. Oh, let's see. That looks pretty good. And so what we're gonna do is we're gonna put all the bolts in, get them going, get them hand tight. And I've also, I don't know if I've polished off this part too. I was torn between go ahead and putting the throttle body on here so I could torque it easily, but it sticks out, and I think it covers 1 or 2 bolts over here, and it's more important that the intake bolts are torqued properly than the throttle body, so I kept it off. But yeah, looking good. I was lazy and I should have cleaned this up some more, but I cleaned up the parts that matter. All right, let's get our bolts. I think I got some right here. We'll start dropping them down. I did clean these bolts too. I let them soak in some mineral spirits and wipe them off. Some of them were kind of grimy. I don't know if I'm gonna be doing a lot of hand tightening. 10 mil. We're gonna put them all in and get them threaded before we start tightening them down. I'll have to go back and revisit the, also got to put in our thermostat. I'll have to go back and revisit the torque pattern. I think it's inner, outer, back and forth. I'll say it now. I'll probably remember it later. But once we get this thing torqued on, we'll take our air hose and we'll blow out each of these spark plug holes too. I didn't put that in the video either, but I did put new spark plugs in, gapped them, anti-seize, all that good stuff. Make sure to clean out the ports well. All of the ignition coils seem to be working just fine when I pulled the intake, so I won't be replacing those. We'll just be putting the old ones back in. As you can see, I'm turning these things in with my hand. I don't need the ratchet. That is good. That is a good sign. You don't want your bolts binding. I've confirmed these are going to be torqued to 18 foot-pounds. Torque matters on this. Let's see, I've got 1, 2, 3. Wait a second. There's more than 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. The thermostat housing plays into this torque sequence as well. One thing to be mindful of too as you're doing this, these holes right here, you can see that right here on the side, they go through to the valley. So if you drop one of these bolts through there, you have to take this intake out again to get to them. The good news is we haven't bolted it down, so it shouldn't matter. Last one, and if I remember, this is the hardest one to get to. There we go. Don't you miss the days of like the late 60s F100s where you could squeeze 2 motors under the hood and your whole body? All right, so they're all in minus the thermostat. Let's get that real quick. All right, got the thermostat. This being an older truck, I picked one that runs a little cooler. So I think this is a 180. Stock's probably like 290 or like 190 or 200. It just sits right on down in there, just like that. And then we're gonna take this rubber O-ring right here. Honestly, it probably want a little bit of lube on that. Not a lot, not too much, just a little bit. Slide that down there just like that. And take our housing. Probably could have cleaned the housing a little better. I did clean this up pretty well. Interestingly, there's not a gasket that goes here. It's just this little O-ring that seals. Not a fan of that, but as far as I know, these trucks don't leak. Bolts. Suppose if you're paranoid, you could put a little bit of gasket sealer in there. Doesn't need it though, the O-ring does the trick. Remember, these are part of the torque sequence, so I'm just gonna get them snug. Okay, so everything's hand tight for the most part. I probably should have cleaned those bolts a little better. Now we'll torque them down here in a second, but we're gonna pause this video for the time being. All right, so I confirmed the torque pattern. And my son's up from a nap, so you may hear him in this. But essentially, it's 1, 2 in the middle, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then this one's 11 right here. All right, so I've got everything torqued down finally. 18 foot-pounds, cross pattern, back and forth, ending here. Went through air hose and blew out all of the spark plug canals. And now what we're going to do is start hooking things back up. I'm going to start with the fuel lines. Just spray a little bit of lube on these. Now we're just going to slide them, stick them up, make sure there ain't nothing obvious in there. Yep. And big on the inside, little on the outside. Slide them in. Make sure they clip. If you can't see, sorry, I know you can't see this on the camera, but there's that little metal ring inside the retainer clip. Make sure, well, it's not a retainer clip, but that little metal spring, make sure you can see it clear and that it snapped into place. Like the second one did not. There we go. So now we're good. Now get your retaining clips. Not sure if all of the Fords are like this, but one of mine, one of the retaining clips is actually zip tied to the line. The other one is right here. I almost lost it taking it off, but we're gonna put them both back on. There we go. And so now what we'll do, before we put the throttle body on, I'm gonna go ahead and put all the ignition coils back in. And so let me go grab those and some dielectric grease. We'll go ahead and bolt those in and then start plugging things up. All right, so now we've got our spark plug boots. Pollen is crazy around here. So apparently pollen got in my garage, which is intriguing. But with these, you want to make sure that they're cleaned up, wipe them off, don't have to be perfect. But you want to make sure that your rubber's intact, your spring on the inside looks good and is not all the way out, but they're close to the end. Clean these things up. Like I said, they were all working whenever I took them out. And put your little dielectric grease here on the end of the boot. That way it just kind of seal off around that plug. And as far as I know, it doesn't matter if these go back on the same cylinder they came off or not. I'm going to attempt to do that. I kept track of them. And then these little bolts hold them in, 7mm. So I'll go ahead and start putting those in, and we'll be back shortly. All right, so we got all of our ignition coils in, snug down. The torque setting is snug. Just make sure they slide all the way in, push them down, holes line up with the intake, and tighten them down. A little dielectric grease on the end of them, and you'll be able to get to them all pretty easily, except for, let's see if you can see, yeah, so except for the one under this vacuum pump right here. You'll need an elbow, or like one of these little bending knuckles to get in there to get that one tight. But the rest of them pretty straightforward. That's the EGR tube, we'll get to that later. But we're going to go back and plug in all the harnesses for the coils and the fuel injectors. And if I'm not mistaken, each of these will only go, yeah, they only go one way. So the injectors, the open end up top, like so. Make sure they all snap into place, and we should be good. And pretty sure they won't easily reach to another one too, so each one has its own, oh, that one's not wanting to, there we go. Each one has its own harness. Make sure they lock. That one's not locking. I'll have to come back to it, figure out why. And then don't forget this one back here in the very back where the fuel line is. It's hiding, and it's very tight back there. So make sure you get that one nailed too. All right, we'll do the other side. Same thing, going down the line. Don't forget your sensor way down here under the intake. Forgive me, I don't remember what sensor that is. Don't want to forget that. You'll have to take the alternator off again to get it. All right, next we're going to put on our heater hoses. Basically this in here just plugs on and snaps on the nipples from the heater core. And we'll hook this one on too. And then this piece goes down on this, and we'll clamp it down. All right, now it's time for the throttle body. Just like the intake, make sure you clean this up really well. Same thing over here. Get your rags out if you need to, and then time for a new gasket. 4 bolts through the top. This one's a booger to get to, but these other ones are all right. And I think the torque is I think 90 foot-pounds, 89 foot-pounds. No, that's way too much. 89 inch-pounds, 90 inch-pounds. Of course, they just need to be nice and snug for the most part. But we'll put this on and go from there. All right, so this pretty much only goes on one way. We'll lay it down here. This would be a lot easier to do outside of the motor, or outside from under the hood. And I'm gonna go ahead and put a couple of bolts back here in the back to help line this thing up. And let's put it on. This is a tight fit back here. I'm kind of holding pressure there, making sure I'm going in. Also raising up, looking. And if you can, go ahead and slide your finger back here and get this back one started, because this throttle body is front heavy. And that will hold your gasket at least somewhat in place. Watch, I let go of this thing and it tilts forward. So we'll go ahead and get our other bolts in. And think I got lucky this time. That could have been way more involved. Cross pattern for tightening. Good news is, at least for me, maybe not for you, they're all going in pretty easily. So we got the throttle body hooked up, all mounted. Well, it's not hooked up, but it's mounted. Next thing we'll do is we'll hook up this EGR tube, use a lot of anti-seize, and just tighten it down. So we're in the home stretch. A little cool tip when you're doing stuff like this, if you got an old pizza box, what you can do is you can take these bolts that go to all this paraphernalia stuff that you can't remember where it goes, punch a hole, stick it through, and label it. So that way you don't forget what goes where, you don't lose anything, and then you have a good excuse to get a pizza. So we'll hop into this. The first thing I want to do, and forgive me, I don't remember what some of this stuff is called. It seems excessive anyway. We're gonna put this little, something to do with the vacuum back up here. There's a tube here that looks like it goes down into, I don't know where that goes. There's some kind of vacuum pump or sensor or something, and then there's a tube that comes off of it that goes into the back of the evap pump, something like that. We're gonna put that back first, and then probably gonna put on there's a PCV way back in here, a PCV tube that we're gonna route around and put in that valve cover over there. And the last part is I've got the vacuum tubing for like this and some other things. The stuff that's the little plastic tubing that's really brittle and known to break, so we're going to be very careful with that. And we'll hook up some of this other stuff too, the brake booster, vacuum hose, and of course our wiring harnesses. So this is it, home stretch, let's do it. All right, so this thing goes right here, 2 bolt holes, 2 bolts. They're 8mm. Go ahead and get those threaded. These are like those bolts that kind of taper on the end. Just be careful with them. I've had issues with those cross threading before. Probably gonna be careful not to over tighten these. I think they strip easily. All right, that's in there. Plug it in. And you may not have to take this thing off, but for me, I had to get it off to get this EGR tube because my wrench was long and was bumping into it. And these are actually 2 different sizes. One's big, one is little. White goes on the bottom, green goes on the top, and we'll come in over here. There we go. All right. I'm just gonna slide. I think it goes here. Pretty sure that's right. Yeah, because the brake booster goes on the lower one. In fact, yeah, it goes on the lower one and bolts on right here. Don't do what I do and just start tearing in the stuff. Take pictures. Saves you a big headache on the back end. Every time I tell myself I'm gonna take pictures, and then I don't. And then I regret it. So that goes there. And then let's get that tube on back there. We're gonna carefully move that out of the way so I don't break it and get in here. This metal bracket will bend too. Just be mindful of that. There we go. All right, brake booster's on. Look at that. Yeah. And that's the throttle cable. I can't remember if that goes under or over. I think it goes under this. Weight on that, swing that around. Okay. Another 8mm little nut goes right here on the EGR valve. Snug it down. Oh, just kidding. That was a 10. Okay, let's get PCV hose. And then the rest of it, I'm pretty sure, is vacuum lines. That goes to the intake. I believe that's our TPS. Back here's PCV. Vacuum line, vacuum line, vacuum line. I think there might be one more. All right, I got the PCV hose. This looks a little different on the 5.4. But basically it comes off back of the throttle body right here. And careful with this plastic piece. I've had to replace some components on this before, and I'm pretty sure this plastic piece is hard to find. You can only really easily get this rubber grommet. And I've even had trouble finding the PCV valve. You can see here where this has gone bad, and I used some rubber hose to fix that, I think, at one point. So just be careful with this, it's fragile. But basically, it's gonna slide in under here. I think it goes under the heater hose. In fact, looking at these indentions over here, pretty confident it goes under the heater hose. We're gonna very carefully maneuver it back here. There's enough trouble to get it on, excuse me, get it off. Get it on, it's gonna be a different story. There we go. All right, PCV valve's in. That's the easy part. All right, let's swing this thing around back here. Yep, the heater hose fit right into that indention. All right, now we're just gonna slide this on. I should probably want to save this thing for last. I've had to pull it off twice now. We'll just sit that right there. Okay. Ooh, if you got big hands, you're in trouble. Ow. My hands aren't that big and I'm still in trouble. There we go. All right. In all honesty, I probably should put a little bit of lube or something on that. But it's in there. Yep, it's going. It drops down behind one of these runners on the back of the intake, which is good. Rest under that heater hose right there. Probably needs to go over it, but it's been under a long time. You can see the indentation on the foam, and it's in the PCV valve, so we're good. I also brought out this little rubber piece. We'll need that. I think it's the same on both ends. We'll need that for the intake tube. I might have put it on. Oh, well, that's easy to change if I need to. Okay, now I'm gonna go ahead and put the alternator and the belt on, I think. Do them little vacuum hoses last. That way I'm not at risk of breaking them. Alternator's easy on these trucks, so that's good news. All right, now for the alternator. I bent the camera down a little bit, but this is easy. You got 2 bolts down here, 2 bolts right here. They are different lengths, so remember that. But this thing goes on pretty easily. If you did your homework and left this bracket on, it goes on even easier, or more easily. And so we're just going to set it down right here like that. Hope that it doesn't slide off while I grab the bolts. I think we're good. If you're worried about it, put the top ones in and hold it in place. The top are shorter than the bottom, and we're looking at 10 mil, I believe. If you know of a better way to put the belt on these things, I would greatly appreciate your advice. I always end up, I know the camera doesn't show this, but I always end up having to slide it down like between the idler pulley and the tensioner pulley. By the way, now, before you put this alternator in, it's a great time to replace those if you need to. And then popping it over the AC compressor and then winding it around everything else. But I got a good breaker bar, so that makes it a little easier instead of reaching down there with a ratchet. Okay, be longer than the top. Also be mindful of how many ribs your belt has. I learned that recently, that some of these, including this one, have 8 ribs. It's a big wide belt. I mean, you can look at that and see. And then some of them have 6 ribs. Let's get these bottom ones tight first. I'm sure there's a torque setting. In my book, it says snug. All right, those are good. Let's do the top. All right, alternator's on. Spins freely. It's got some age on it there. Okay, now I'll get my breaker bar and put the belt on. All right, there's the belt. If you don't have something like this for changing belts, it becomes a little whatever, get you one. For years I used a ratchet and maybe a wrench if I needed an extension. This thing here has changed my life. $20, Harbor Freight. And hopefully you're a little more graceful at this than I am. I usually end up slicing my arm open on something. Now this isn't necessary for changing the belt, but I actually have this fender well plastic shroud removed because I took it out when I was trying to find the water leak earlier and didn't put it back. But without that there, it makes it really easy to thread this over the AC compressor, but you don't need to do that. You can, and like I said, it's dark, but in the light, you can actually reach down in here and thread it over. Ta-da! I hope. Okay. So I ended up having to pull it off of the power steering pump and then the water pump, and then put it back on the power steering pump and then back on the water pump. That got it. And we're on. Looks like we're good. Looks like we're on everything. All right, now that the belt's on, I'm a year older. Let's get our line, our alternator lines hooked back up. We're gonna run them under that. Just another little nut you could lose. Be careful with that. We'll say this: the design for that water tube running under the intake was so close. If it wasn't for that sensor and that lower half of the manifold, you could remove this, and there's that tube, and you could get to it. But they put a big old obstacle in the way. All right, careful with these. You want them snug, but if you're not careful, you can break this off the back of the alternator, and that's not good. You don't want that to happen. Careful with these too. These clips are fragile and can break. This goes here, two 10mm bolts. Again, torque to snug. Careful, these will cross thread. I can feel this one wanting to give. You gotta love aluminum and brass. Okay. Well, this is it. This is the Achilles heel in the automotive world. These crappy plastic vacuum lines that get like really brittle and break and all this other lovely stuff. I may end up taking this heater hose back off to place this thing, but oh, I hate this stuff. That's not the only, there are multiple things, but that's one positive thing about running a carburetor on a car. You don't got these stupid old vacuum lines. But tell you what, if you look around under the hood of this truck, you see all this clay and mud. It's a miracle this thing's still intact, and it's there may be a crack somewhere near, you can't see it. From what you can tell, it seems to be intact. Even these rubber grommets on the corners. Don't break, please don't break. Oh, please don't break. Okay. I know this needs to go under that. Under this, I think. So this one's going here to the EGR valve. This one's going here. Where'd it go? There's one. Yep, this one goes here to the fuel line, or the fuel rail. Yep, right there. Leave that. Whew. That actually, because these have to come here. That goes right there just like that. All this come up here. I've got two. Of course, it's not locking. Oh, it's not going to lock. It's broken. Yeah, that goes there, so the intake. This needs to come snapping. Much for that. This essentially sits down in here. Stick it in from the side, rotate it, just like that. And this clips carefully into that. I think that's your cruise. All right. And two more 10mm bolts, just like these two. Go right here. This is gonna come right there. Let's not forget our other evap hose, which I did. I just happened to see it, thankfully. And we're gonna go over that vacuum line. All right. A power steering pump bracket. Now for me, in my opinion, my best luck with this has been putting this piece on first. It goes on top here, and then putting this piece, pulling it over and putting it on there. So we'll do that. 3 8mm bolts, all the same. One thing we do want to be mindful of are these vacuum lines and the PCV tube and all this other crap. Ah, and that's where the throttle cable mounts. That's what I was suspicious of, but I didn't know for certain. $8 mil. I think I said that. And that's it. That's the last bolt that was in my pizza. Let's put some pressure on this. Careful that the power steering reservoir's not cracking or anything. That's it. That's the last bolt that's in my pizza box. So that's good. Get that good and tight. All right. And then this is supposed to stick down in there, but I broke the other piece, so a lot of good that'll do. Okay. Don't like that. Let's change that. Yeah. Let's run under it. There we go. That's better. Try not to put any kind of tension on this line if you can help it. All right, let's put the water hose on. I don't have any of like the hose clamps like what I used on the heater hoses over here. I like those better, but I've got the original Ford ones here. But if you are dealing with these, don't use pliers. It's a waste of your time. You can get like one of these little tools here. It's basically like a hose clamp remover. And it slides on there, it sticks. It's not coming off very easily. You can kind of see how, well, you can kind of see how it works. And it'll lock in place like this one is. You can unlock it. Makes working with these clamps way easier than trying to slide things off with pliers. So, I can't remember, like I think they might be like 20 bucks or 15 or something. Worth the money. And that's what they're created for. Well, I got the radiator side on. That was the easy one. All right. Yeah, as tight as that is, I need a hose clamp. All right, let's get our clamp on. There we go. Right, that's where we want it, right there. Now this one over here, I don't think this one's on camera. Sorry. Hose is on. Get that thing in the bracket there, support bracket. My luck, it's easier to start with this side. Let's go ahead and slide it on. This thing's a booger to break loose, but once you've got it loose, it comes on and off pretty easily. There we go. See, just like that. Yep. So down in here, I've just got a piece of tube coming straight off the valve cover for the PCV. And it's supposed to be at 90-degree angle. And so what I did was I got a bigger piece of tube so I could bend it and it still serve its purpose, but it doesn't make hooking this back up as easy as it should be. There we go. All right, it's hooked up. Now this has got to go in here. This has got to go. Well, what are we catching on here? Okay, there we go. We'll reroute this. Yep, it's going to go like this. Ta-da! There we go. All right, it's folding in on itself. So that's in. 10 minutes later, what should have been a 5-minute job. I just hope I didn't crack any of those stupid vacuum lines. All right. All right, look at that. We in business. It just needs some coolant. All right, here's the moment of truth. Make sure there's no fuel spewing everywhere. Don't look like it. Radio works. And this is actually running. And it's not misfiring, not yet. PCV valve going bad.